Welcome to Tailboard Talk, a fourth shift fitcast. The mission of Tailboard Talk and the fourth shift fitness is to educate and train fire service personnel to increase durability and decrease the potential for injuries and their associated costs. My name is Chris Morella, owner and founder of Fourth Shift Fitness. I'll use my experience as a personal trainer, strength coach, and 15-year veteran of the fire service to deliver tips, tricks, lessons, and information specifically geared towards the health and wellness of firefighters and paramedics. Each episode, you'll leave with immediate deliverables that will improve performance and resilience and keep you in the fight through your career and into retirement. Let's get into it. So these dogs will keep barking. And Nathan hasn't been napping. So when I was just inside, I could hear him jumping up and down in his crib, which means that'll happen until he decides to crawl out of his crib now.
Okay.
So this could be an exciting,
all right,
fun-filled episode. But welcome to Tailboard Talk. Chris here from Fourth Shift Fitness, and again, Curt from LGN Performance. And today we're going to be talking about mobility for firefighting because it's important, and it's one of the most, I'd say it's the most underappreciated of the three of stability, strength, and mobility. Stability, flexibility, and mobility. Everybody worries about stability being strength and flexibility because that's common to think about. And very few people understand or care about mobility because it's not easily conceptualized and it's also difficult to achieve. So people would rather just stretch out instead of working on owning a space. So we're going to run through mobility for firefighting. One of the things I wanted to kind of go over first, and I'm thinking I'm going to ambush Curt with a question. If you can just define or go into what is mobility. You can play it against flexibility and stability, but what is mobility?
So mobility, for me, is the active range of motion that a joint can go through. So flexibility would be more passive. So, I lay down on my back and pull my knee up to my chest. How far can I pull that passively without using my muscles to do so? And mobility would be, how far down can I squat? What can I get my knee angle to as I'm squatting? Either body weight or resistance, whatever it may be. But the active range of motion ends up being mobility for me.
So the same thing of, like if you're laying on your back and you hug your knee to your chest is flexibility, or even if you're doing like a straight leg raise, but then without grabbing it, how far can you raise it up in air would be the mobility part, right?
Mm-hmm.
All right. And then that goes into kind of what we fall back on a lot when we teach this stuff is a joint-by-joint approach. So I'll massacre that one real quick, and we can pick up the pieces. I'll try to make it as succinct as possible, but from the ground up, your body is organized in kind of a stacked joint fashion. So there's two different kinds of joints. There's joints that need stability, and there's joints that need motion or mobility, and they alternate each other. So not looking at the bottom, but let's start right in the middle, kind of your knee. Your knee needs stability. So it's a hinge surrounded by two very mobile joints. It needs to be stable or else it can't do its job. It doesn't have a lot of room to wiggle back and forth. It basically has one plane of motion, but on top and bottom of that are your ankle and your hip, which need mobility to function well. If they lack mobility, if your hips are tied up, and if your ankle is kind of tied up, then your knee is going to try to compensate for those two things. So that system works from the ground up all the way up to the top of your head and all the way out to the tips of your fingers and the tips of your toes. They're stacked. So your ankle needs mobility, and even farther than that, it goes down to the great toe, right, the big toe. But then your ankle needs mobility, your knee needs stability. Your hip is a weird combination of both, but your lower back needs stability. So that means that the hips more or less need more mobility. Where we get into trouble a lot is we mess that up. Like I said, we tie up our hips with gear and belts and uniforms, and then it makes our lower back and our knees, which are supposed to be stable, it makes them mobile, and then that becomes kind of an issue. So of the three, I have three written up here: T-spine, hips, and ankle are written on the board. Curt, what do you think is the most important one to address mobility-wise?
For me, it'd be hips.
Okay.
It's a tough one as I'm looking at them up there. They're all,
yeah.
I mean, they all are. Hips for me, I mean, they're just the powerhouse of everything. So for me, any dysfunction that ends up in the hips, it can work upstream and downstream, to create a litany of different problems. So that's probably where I'd start. I would think that firefighter specific, though, I would probably say that T-spine would be more of an issue than hips.
Okay.
I think it's 50-50 now that I
Okay.
look at it. I'm just thinking back of a lot of the injuries that we typically see. And for us, shoulders, rotator cuff end up being a huge one. And then low backs obviously end up being the other ones. And obviously that stuff is directly impacted by T-spine and kind of pelvic girdle mobility issues. I guess our third one would probably be knees, which you could go to hips and ankles on that one. But I think just in our small world that those two seem to be the biggest long-term injury problems and the mobility issues that go along with those.
So I'm going to go with T-spine, purely because as you were explaining it, I switched. I was going to go hips first too. As you're explaining it, I was trying to think of ways that we can mitigate lower back and shoulder injuries. And the hips, if they're tied up, that affects squatting more than anything, right?
Mm-hmm.
But there's ways that we can get down to the ground, like in a stagger stance, or like what Raph would call a rocket start, or like a split squat position almost, but just shortened up. So there's ways that we can get down to the ground and almost avoid using our hips dramatically, or we can use them like on one side, kind of asymmetrically, so your pelvis rotates a little bit more and gets you out of that like lumbar flexion kind of posture. But T-spine, if your T-spine's locked up, and then all your motion's coming from the socket of your humerus and your shoulder, that's really tough to get around that. Like you don't have much choice but to reach overhead sometimes, and you don't have much choice but to pull things or push things towards you or away from you. And so with a squat, you can get around it by staggering your feet. With your shoulders, you're kind of locked into it. There's not a ton of compensation you can do by changing your position necessarily. So I'm going to go with T-spine. I think that's a big one. But the third one on the list is ankle. I think that's probably the most under-recognized one for sure. I got to start wearing like shoes and Under Armour type of boots that I keep pretty loose at the ankle. They're zippers, obviously, because we're tactical and you have to fling your shoes off at a moment's notice like tactical people do. But I started wearing them unzipped for the most part. And when I mistakenly got a pair of non-zippered ones, I left them essentially untied from like the midfoot up because I want to be able to move my ankles in them. And they're just more comfortable.
I unzip too, for sure.
Yeah. Well, then the old like Red Wings that had the big fat zipper up the front of the ankle,
Mm-hmm.
those were like straight jackets.
Yep.
Those were severely restricting. So I think of the three, that's probably the most under-recognized one. But I would put the T-spine as top of the list for the impacted areas. What do you think? Do you think there's much? Do you have a new set of gear, like a newer set?
I have a newer set, yeah.
Is it way better?
Yeah. There's parts of it that are better. In terms of overhead, it feels better. The problem is with the built-in rescue harness in there. If that gets janked up somehow, sometimes I feel like that restricts a little bit. Also, some of them have kind of a rigid collar on them that if you're wearing your mask and go overhead, sometimes that collar can hit off your mat or be impeded by your mask or your helmet, and that can restrict some range of motion too. So I've kind of played around with getting different coats that don't have a kind of a stiff neck coming up from the top of them. Leg pants, though, for sure, I think have gotten way better. At least for me, and I took a class probably like 15 years ago, 12 years ago, where we did a functional movement screen on everybody, and then we all got in gear and repeated the functional movement screen. And at the time, everyone, just by putting their gear on, no air pack or anything, lost a third of their available range of motion between gear and out of gear. I do think that the pants have come a long way, though. I think that the built-in knee pads have gotten better and allowed for some more range of motion on them. I felt like that was always restrictive there in the front. And I feel like the waist harnesses have also gotten better in terms of buckling up. Instead of having like a webbing clip that's come through, they seem to have some more elastic built into them, kind of like those husky pants that you like that have the stretchy to them, the jegging material
right
to them.
Happen to be wearing those right now. Crotch gusset and everything. Do you wear suspenders?
I don't.
Me neither. Do you notice the difference with that?
Yes.
Me too.
Huge.
Do you have the big, like, old overlapping Velcro?
Yeah.
Do you?
Mm-hmm.
I want to get that back again because that was cool because it had a big fat pad in your lower back too, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Mine's just like a 2 or 3 inch wide piece of webbing with a big fat plastic buckle on it.
Yeah.
But still, it sits on my leather belt on my duty pants, which is cool. So it's not super tight where it's like choking off my guts or anything, but it sits on top of them, and I don't have the pull on my shoulders. But I do still wear the radio strap, but I widen that out to a bigger fat canvas one now, so it's all different. What about so we've always had MSA where we work. The new packs I think are really nice, but they've made some significant like improvements. But I feel like when they tried to go so far and so comfortable, they made it kind of more cumbersome in spots. Like they're a little bit heavier, and they made the waist strap so wide and so broad in your lumbar area that it's almost hard to tighten up because it's more rigid. And,
yeah.
I don't know. I'd like to see.
They're a little bit cumbersome too as they break in a little bit. They get folded behind you sometimes as you're trying to don them. And but yeah, the waist strap I agree with. I think is not as functional as I think they intended it to be.
Yeah, well, especially when I think they almost planned it for people to wear it improperly. Like they've planned it for people to wear it on or below their hip bones and resting on their lower back, like their tailbone area, instead of hiking it up further and putting it above and resting it above your hip crest more or less, where it could do more good in terms of hip mobility. What other things can you think of that people have done or that we've gotten in the past like 10 years? Because really it's a broad range. When we were doing our combat challenge stuff, we ordered race gear. And now the gear that we have is almost as comfortable as that stuff. Like the knees were sewn so they had a natural bend in them. They rode a lot higher on your hips so that it wasn't in your way. The ankles were a little bit wider so they didn't drag on the boots all the time. And they took a lot of that stuff and they put it on our frontline gear. But what other stuff do we have that's really kind of helped us out with our mobility and biomechanics?
We've upgraded boots too.
That's right.
We had the big clunky rubber boots, galosh things when I started, and we've gotten some much more comfortable leather boots. There's other ones that I read up on a little bit lately that I don't know if they have a Kevlar material to them, but specifically for more ankle range of motion is kind of their marketing plot with them. But the boots were moving away from those rubber boots was huge, I think.
Yeah. I think I used those at the place I used to work, and I might have had a pair where we work, and then we quickly went to leather ones. We had those like cross-tech fabric ones for a while too that were pretty sweet. They're like a leather boot and then like the fabric upper kind of.
The gloves have come a long way too. We had just bulky snow gloves kind of when we started, and now I think those have come a long way to be a lot more functional. You don't burn out your forearms as fast trying to cling on to something with the bulky gloves that we had before.
Yeah, they're a lot better. So if you had to pick between stretching out right now, like if you pick your hips as being tight, right? And most people are going to feel that tension, let's say in their lower back or even their hamstrings, and their first move is going to be to go to stretch it out. So they're going to do like a toe touch, or they're going to do like a knee hug stretch, or they're going to do like where you sit on your butt and cross one leg over the other and twist against your up leg kind of thing, like that calendar pose. But if someone came to you and said, hey, I feel a lot of tension in my hips or my lower back or my hamstrings, where would you start? What would you tell them to do?
If I were coaching them, I would just ask them to squat first and see what it looks like. Everyone's hips anatomy is different. And so we've talked about this previously is people who don't know may be squatting to an arbitrary standard that they've heard before. And that squat standard that they're squatting to that someone's told them may be detrimental to their hamstrings or to the low back. And so I might just look and see if their squat looks either get the bump like at the bottom or something. I might just tell them not to squat as deep anymore and see where that takes them to start. As we've gone through injury stuff at LGN, I think we kind of came up with that system of like, all right, well, what's the first thing we're going to do? Let's not change the movement pattern. Let's reduce the resistance first. So, or change the implement first. So if you're back squatting and that's giving you problems, let's goblet squat and see if that gives you problems. If goblet squat gives you problems, let's bodyweight squat. If that gives you problems, let's shorten the range of motion. If that still gives you problems, then maybe we'll, address something else or change the movement pattern. But if it's just a specific move like that, I'd probably look there first and just say, is this person just squatting too deep? And if they are, then let's address that and then go from there.
So you're talking about like, because they're squatting too deep, they're eliciting a change in their lower back, or something's messing with their back or hamstrings that's causing a strain or tension, like a perception of a strain or tension, more or less, right?
Yeah.
How many people have you seen? Because I had a conversation with one of our guys the other day who was talking about his hamstring, and he's got, sounds like just a, I don't want to say tendinopathy kind of thing because that's kind of above my scope, but he's got an irritated hamstring. And the more we talked about it, the more we were figuring out, like, if somebody's hamstring feels tight or their lower back feels tight, it might be. But it might be tight because it's trying to compensate for something else, like kind of going back to that stacked joint approach. If you have lower back tightness, it might be because your hips are very weak or messed up somehow, asymmetrical, dysfunction somehow. And that's not like, I know there's a big thing about not calling things dysfunctional because you don't want to tell people they're a mess, but there's an issue, right? There's some sort of mechanical issue with your hips where they don't have the strength or stability needed, and so your lower back is trying to save it. So it is actually tight. It is actually tense, but it's purposefully tense to protect everything else around it. And then once you start backtracking that, you might realize that, like, oh, your T-spine is completely locked up, and your lower back has been pulling double duty for reaching and extending and bending. So once we loosen up your T-spine, your lower back won't have to be so tense. But if you just go ahead and stretch your lower back, you're actually taking away a protective measure that your body put in place because something else is janky. So that's exactly what we did at LGN. Was a lot of times when we'd have people squat, you'd watch them from behind and not the side, and you see what would catch first or what would fail first or what would collapse first, and then kind of look around that, because if that thing is collapsing, it's either overloaded and really just can't keep up, or it's being kind of it's being sacrificed by something else not doing its job and it's pulling double duty, so it's wearing out faster. And a lot of times I think with squatting, what we would see was, like, if someone had a barbell back squat, they would start going down, and then about halfway down, their upper back would start to round, and they would be more or less looking down at their toes. And then as they go down further, they fail to maintain that tension in their lats, and so then their lower back lets go, and then they have a lower back issue or a knee issue from some kind of collapse at the bottom end. So, yeah, having some sort of diagnostic screen like that or exam to find out what thing is going wrong, I think, is number one. So if we look at the low back then, and this isn't like a low back pain thing, but this is a mobility thing. What do you think where would you put an appropriate level of range of motion for the hips then? For firefighting, for general purpose, like, how do you know when the hips are good enough and now it is a low back issue?
I think low back issues are typically repeatable. So if you know that this motion, if I do this motion over and over again, it will always hurt, that it's a low back issue. If you just have some general tightness, to one side or the other or both sides of your spine, then to me, I would probably look at something else before then. So I guess just to clarify, if you know that, like, twisting and bending down towards the right is always going to make your back hurt no matter what, that's a back issue to me. And if you squat or you do dead bugs or something like that and your back just feels fatigued, to me, that's not a back issue. It might be weakness issue, but not necessarily a back injury issue, more of a mobility issue somewhere else or a dysfunction issue somewhere else.
But that's a good thing, right?
Yeah.
Like that's far preferred than having a specific action or leverage that causes pain or like numbness and tingling in your legs or anything like that. If you have just generalized tension, that's actually the best indicator that you have hopefully a fixable problem that just needs strength and a little bit more control to take over.
So the problem with that people do then is they go, my back feels tight, so I'm going to do like the seated, twisting stretch or whatever. And that feels good, but it's not addressing the problem that you have. It feels good to get just like a little stretch through your back and whatnot, but that tension isn't there because your back is tight. That tension is there because something else made your back tight. Right. And so you got to address that problem. Figuring out what that is sometimes ends up being tougher.
That is a tougher one. When have you referred out? When people have come to you and you kind of go down through your screen, and at what point do you usually push people out and say you need something of a higher degree than a personal trainer?
I'll go through like a system of body weight movements, and for us, we use the FMS for a long period of time. But if you have pain, like I don't want to do another one of these reps pain on body weight stuff, that's probably something that somebody smarter than me needs to take a look at versus me trying to beat up on it and go, did that work? Or did it make it worse? And so for me, if someone comes in and initially with some pretty basic body weight stuff, they have pain in specific areas, then that's a refer out for me. For me, also, it's joints. Muscles, like I'm not concerned with muscle pain because people are going to have that when they start it up. And a lot of times people can't actually communicate my hamstring's tight versus, ow, that was painful to lift my leg up.
Yeah.
But when people point to their knee and go, it hurts right here and it feels deep inside, like that's most likely something that I don't want to take on right away. Will strength and conditioning help that? Most probably, but I'd rather have a better answer for that starting than let's just take a guess and see what happens.
That is a big one, right? We'd have, how many people would be like, that really hurts doing any movement. And you'd be like, well, where does it hurt? We're like, my thighs are burning right now. Like,
yeah.
Okay, it's not hurt. It's not pain.
Right.
It's just you trying
Let's
hard.
Let's come up with a different word. That didn't hurt.
Like, stop scaring me.
Yeah.
And you like collapse on the ground and tell me it hurts.
Yep.
Oh my God. So if you're going to design a program, and this is kind of we can split this off and talk about it further, but if you're going to design a program, what would you tell people to expect from their job, right? So with any sport, you know what to expect. Like the demands of the sport are going to kind of drive the training. But we have different ones, right? Like you got to be able to sit in a jump seat and reach behind you and put an air pack on. You need to be able to put your pants and coat on quickly and then be in a seated position that's pretty uncomfortable for a little bit and then get out and take a big step down with your hips, Mm-hmm. So if you're going to design a program and key in on like a range of motion or a job demand, would you say that you're going to see, it's a bad question. I was going to say, would you focus more on flexibility or mobility? But
well, here's the thing: is strength training is the greatest mobility work you can do.
Yes.
So, without a doubt, I would start there. When you feel like you have a reasonable strength training program going, then I would start adding mobility work in. I would not start with mobility work and go, I'm going to work up to strength training. I would start the other way, and I would get on a decent resistance training program that is attainable and I'm not skipping out on, a realistic program that I could follow. And then I would start adding specific mobility stuff in after I felt like I had a handle on that. But, if you don't have the requisite strength stuff to go along with this stuff, mobility is, a drop in the bucket at that point. You're not going to make lasting changes.
That's what I was getting at. Because this is an example that we both encountered is guys will come to us and say, guys or girls will come to us and say like, yeah, I just need to stretch out more. Like I'm still an athlete and I used to play this sport or that sport, but I really just got to work on my flexibility. So can you draw me up a stretching program or a mobility program,
Mm-hmm.
And it's very difficult because, well, they might do it if you give it to them. But you also know that, like, hey, man, you were an athlete, but now you're in your upper 40s. And, like, if you somehow do build a range of motion, I'm not so sure you can control that range of motion, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And, but I think for a lot of people, that's an easy thing to ask for because it's like, oh, I'm just going to stretch. I'm tired of lifting and feeling like crap by training real hard and gaining range of motion through like purposeful weight training. So maybe I'll just do something easier and stretch. Mm-hmm. And it's kind of what I was driving at because I also fall into
we also know the next step of that is they don't do either of them.
Correct. Yeah. They come back and tell you why your program didn't work.
Right.
And then you ask them how many times they did. And they're like, well, I tried once, but it was uncomfortable. And then my back hurt for 3 days. So I decided not to do it again. So give me something else. Mm-hmm. Like, okay, here's the couch. It brought up too many examples when you said that, and I lost my train of thought. I also fall into the camp of like, what's the saying is like, training is therapy and therapy is training. Is that it, right? Yep. And it falls into what you're saying of like, if you give somebody an appropriate loaded exercise like a goblet squat, and some movements are easier when they're loaded up, like hang power cleans are easier when they're loaded up a little bit, and deadlifts are easier, and back squats and front squats are definitely easier when you have a little bit of weight on the bar that makes you brace or protect against it. If you give someone a heavy goblet squat, and because that leverage on the front of them is making them engage their core all the way around and makes them sit back on their heels a little bit and then share the weight with their midfoot at the bottom and gets them in a great position at the bottom, I mean, that's as good as any like static stretching routine is going to be because not only are they in that position that they might not have been able to do with just 5 or 10 pounds, but they can do it with 40 pounds. Not only in that position, but now they're controlling weight at that position and moving out of it, which is essentially what we're doing all the time. I was kind of trying to think the other day when I was at work about what weights are really, really useful for us. Like if you're just going to have a 20-pound range of weights, let's say you can have like 4 sets of dumbbells in a range of weights. I would put them at the 40 to like 80-pound range is what we need to be able to manipulate like safely and effectively, you know? Mm-hmm. And a lot of it's below that, like the jump bag and even an air pack or something like that is below that. But when you get talking about like a 28-foot ladder throw or carrying the extrication equipment or grabbing the power unit for the extrication equipment or grabbing 2 sections of skid load, that's all well above 30 pounds. And so while it seems like picking up a 60 to 80-pound dumbbell might seem heavy, it's really the same weight we use for a lot of stuff. It's just in a different form. Yeah. So being able to, as you get older and you get further along in your career, you might feel the desire, like I just need more flexibility to keep myself safe, and I need this and that to keep my career going until I can retire. But in reality, if you stop throwing around 40 to 80-pound weights, that's what's going to make you lose your mobility and your strength and your protective measures faster than anything. And I think we saw that in LGN where we would have people come in that hadn't lifted weights for decades and struggled direly with 45-pound or 95-pound squat, right? Mm-hmm. And they also had a very limited range of motion naturally. And then as we progressively loaded them up under the heavier bar, heavier weights, they got a way better range of motion, and they were able to tolerate. They kind of snapped back 20 years. You know, their training age, or their biological age almost regressed, which was cool to see.
I think an easy parallel that might be easier to understand too is just draw it to nutrition and supplementation. Is like if you have a terrible diet, your extra vitamin D pill that you're taking in the morning is not going to help, or if you're not drinking any water, your extra multivitamin isn't going to be your saving grace. So you have to have that foundation of set in place before you add the fringe benefit stuff to it.
So we can make a statement here that we can turn into a cool tagline. Something like the strength and mobility. Somehow strength and mobility, like strength is the greatest asset of mobility or something like that. Or
something like that.
Something cool. I'll think about it. I'll make it into a quote, put it on Instagram.
There you go.
Anything else on mobility? This can be a short episode. It's okay.
No, I think that was it. Is strength training will be your greatest mobility work.
That's it.
Is it?
Sure, man.
right.
Why not? Strength training will be your greatest mobility work.
There you go.
I like it.
All right.
And the heavier the better, especially if you crush yourself into a diamond. No, that takes it too far. All right, guys. If you want to reach out, please do. forceShiftFit@gmail.com or at Force Shift Fitness on all social media. Check out our YouTube pages. We have all the videos from our top 10 bodyweight movements up there, and I'm going to put them into a playlist. Just like I said I was going to do last week, I might actually do it this week. I'll also be posting way more of those this week because I went back and found some of the old files with the videos of the movements we talked about. So look for those on social media this week. Give out your contact stuff again real quick.
It's at Curt, CURT _Hansen, SON, or at LGN_performance.
Awesome, guys. If you need anything, don't hesitate to reach out. We're going to keep doing these weekly, and we're going to keep coming up with firefighter-specific topics and just general wellness topics, too. Talk to you guys soon, and be a force shifter.